When a homeless man approached Barron Trump asking for just $1, no one could have foreseen what would happen next. What began as a simple act of kindness would ignite a nationwide movement, mend a fractured family, and transform countless lives forever. The city buzzed with its usual energy, cars honking, pedestrians weaving through the streets, and voices blending into an urban symphony. On the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat hunched against the weathered wall of an old convenience store. His clothes were threadbare, barely enough to shield him from the biting winter wind. A cardboard sign beside him read, "Anything helps. God bless." His name was Leonard, though few people ever bothered to ask. At 42, Leonard had spent nearly a year surviving on the streets after a series of setbacks stole everything he once cherished. Each day was a gamble. Sometimes a passerby would toss him a few coins, but more often they averted their eyes and hurried past as if he were invisible. Leonard adjusted his worn-out beanie and shivered, his gaze fixed on the shoes that scurried by, polished loafers, sneakers, high heels, all symbols of lives much different from his own. Then, something caught his attention, a pristine pair of white sneakers that stopped just a few feet away. They were unmistakably expensive, the kind only someone young and privileged might wear. Curiosity got the better of Leonard, and he looked up. Standing there was a teenager, tall, poised, and radiating a quiet confidence that felt out of place amid the city's chaos. Hands casually tucked into the pockets of his sleek jacket, the boy scrolled through his phone, seemingly oblivious to the attention he was drawing. Around them, whispers spread. Some people even discreetly snapped photos, recognizing the teen. Leonard hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of asking for money unless someone met his gaze first, but there was something about the boy's demeanor, unhurried and observant, that made him take a chance. Clearing his throat, Leonard called out, his voice raspy from the cold. "Hey, young man. Can you spare $1?" The teenager froze mid-scroll, tilting his head slightly as if to confirm he'd heard correctly. Slowly, he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Leonard braced himself for rejection. He was used to it. But instead, the boy responded with a calm, firm question. "What do you need it for?" Leonard blinked, caught off guard. The question wasn't rude or dismissive. Instead, it carried weight, as if the boy genuinely wanted to know. Leonard swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. "Well," he began, rubbing his hands together for warmth, "a cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich, if I'm lucky." His voice faltered under the boy's steady gaze. The teenager stepped closer, sliding his phone into his pocket, seemingly unconcerned about the growing attention they were attracting. Leonard could feel the judgmental stares of the crowd, the silent disbelief that someone like this boy would waste time on someone like him. Embarrassed, Leonard wanted to shrink away, but the boy's focus anchored him there. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he replied softly, his voice barely audible. The boy nodded, his brow furrowing as if he were processing something far beyond the moment. "I'm Barron," he said simply. There was no arrogance in his introduction, no trace of entitlement, just sincerity. The hum of the city seemed to return, but something had shifted. The air between them felt different, charged with an unspoken significance. Leonard shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to make of this unexpected exchange. Then, to Leonard's surprise, Barron crouched down, meeting him at eye level. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his tone even but direct. Leonard hesitated. He rarely shared his story, most people didn't care to hear it. But there was something about Barron, an openness, a lack of judgment, that made it easier to speak. "Almost a year," Leonard admitted quietly. "Lost my job when the plant shut down. My health got bad after that, and I couldn't keep up with rent. Everything just fell apart." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his expression shifting slightly, not in pity, but in focus, as though he were piecing together a puzzle only he could see. Leonard felt something he hadn't in a long time seen. People stopped to stare, whispering to each other. Some even paused in their tracks, their curiosity sparked by the unusual sight of the young Trump heir crouched on the sidewalk beside a homeless man. "What about family?" Barron asked quietly. Leonard's jaw tightened as he shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore," he admitted. "My folks passed a long time ago. My brother, well, we haven't spoken in years." He chuckled bitterly, a hollow sound. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all." Barron was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful as if carefully considering Leonard's words. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had only asked for $1, nothing more, but Barron's actions hinted at something different. When Barron's hand reemerged, he wasn't holding a single bill. Instead, a crisp $100 note was pinched between his fingers. Leonard blinked, stunned. "Here," Barron said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than coffee." Leonard stared at the money, his disbelief paralyzing him. It wasn't just the amount, it was the gesture itself. "Are you serious?" Leonard finally managed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why would you do this?" Barron shrugged lightly, as if the answer were obvious. "Because I can." The simplicity of his response left Leonard speechless. Before Leonard could gather his thoughts, Barron leaned in closer, his voice soft but firm. "But listen," he added, "this isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something." Leonard clutched the bill tightly, as though it might disappear. "What's that?" he asked hesitantly. Barron's expression turned serious, the weight of his words unmistakable. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" Leonard swallowed hard, a lump rising in his throat. The words hit deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, someone wasn't just tossing him a lifeline, they were challenging him to use it. He nodded, unable to find his voice. "Good," Barron said, standing back up. His calm composure remained unshaken, even as more people gathered, recording the scene on their phones. Leonard felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment as he noticed the crowd, unsure whether to feel grateful, ashamed, or both. Barron reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a pen and a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly, tore out the page, and handed it to Leonard. "Go to this address tomorrow morning. They'll help you out, just tell them I sent you." Leonard unfolded the paper, his hands trembling slightly. The address belonged to a local shelter and resource center, one he'd heard about but had always been too proud or ashamed to visit. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Barron added, his voice steady and unwavering. As Leonard held the note and the money, something shifted in the air. This wasn't just a random act of kindness, it was hope, tangible and real, flickering to life after years of darkness. Deep down, Leonard knew this moment was just the beginning of something far bigger. He sat there staring at the $100 bill and the note in his hands like they were foreign objects, his mind racing between disbelief and cautious hope. Barron didn't immediately walk away. Instead, he lingered, watching Leonard with an intensity that made him feel almost exposed. It was clear this wasn't about charity. Barron was waiting for a commitment, an acknowledgement. Leonard cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Why?" he asked, his tone tinged with confusion. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Barron tilted his head, a faint but genuine smile forming on his lips. "Because everyone has a story, Leonard. Yours just hasn't been told yet." He paused, his gaze flickering toward the growing crowd. "And honestly, if I'm in a position to do something good, why wouldn't I?" Leonard was taken aback. He'd heard plenty of empty platitudes over the years, but Barron's words carried a weight he hadn't expected. Still, doubt lingered. "You don't owe me anything," Leonard said, his voice firmer now. "People don't just stop to help without expecting something in return." Barron crouched back down, meeting Leonard's gaze at eye level. "I'm not asking for anything," he replied simply. "But I do believe small actions can lead to something bigger." He nodded toward the note in Leonard's hand. That place, they've got resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you need. All I'm asking is that you show up. Leonard glanced at the note again, his throat tight. He wanted to believe this was real, but years of disappointment had hardened him against hope. And what if I can't? He asked quietly. What if I screw it all up? Barron smiled faintly, shaking his head. Everyone messes up, Leonard. The only way you lose is if you give up. The words were simple, but they struck with unexpected force. For a moment, the noise of the city seemed to vanish, leaving only the quiet conviction in Barron's voice. The crowd around them had thickened, with phones openly recording the interaction. Someone whispered, "Is that Barron Trump?" Leonard shifted uneasily, aware of the growing attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. The weight of so many eyes on him felt suffocating. Yet Barron remained completely unfazed. If anything, he seemed to thrive under the attention. His calm, steady demeanor was a stark contrast to Leonard's growing unease. "Forget about them," Barron said softly, as if reading Leonard's mind. "This is about you and me right now. No one else matters." Leonard felt an unexpected wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't feel invisible. Someone actually saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. "All right," Leonard said at last, his voice steady and sure. "I'll go. I'll show up." Barron's face softened, and a genuine smile spread across his features. "That's all I wanted to hear." Standing up, he dusted off his knees and glanced briefly at the crowd that had gathered. Then, turning back to Leonard, he added, this time loud enough for everyone to hear, "And Leonard, you've got more strength in you than you think. Don't forget that." Leonard blinked, overwhelmed by a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. He wanted to respond, to say something meaningful, but no words came. Instead, he just nodded, holding the note in his hand like a lifeline. As Barron turned and walked away, the crowd parted for him, their whispers growing louder with every step he took. Leonard watched him disappear into the flow of city life, his figure blending seamlessly into the crowd. And yet, for the first time in years, Leonard felt a flicker of something he thought was lost, hope. He glanced down at the note again and realized this was more than just a kind gesture. It was the first step toward reclaiming his life. The next morning, Leonard stood in front of the address Barron had given him, a modest brick building on a quiet street in Cleveland. A simple sign marked the entrance, Hope Outreach Resource Center. People streamed in and out, some with bags of groceries, others with the same look of uncertainty that Leonard felt in his gut. He clutched the note in his pocket, tracing its edges with his fingers to reassure himself that this was real. The crisp $100 bill was still tucked safely in his jacket. Part of him wanted to keep it forever as proof of what had happened, but another part, the part stirred by Barron's words, whispered that this wasn't about the money. This was about taking a chance to start over. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stepped inside. Warmth greeted him immediately, a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. Behind a front desk sat a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm, welcoming smile. "How can I help you today?" she asked. Leonard hesitated for a moment before pulling out the note and sliding it across the counter. Barron sent me. Said I should come here." The woman glanced at the paper, and a knowing smile spread across her face. You must be Leonard. We've been expecting you." She stood up and gestured for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours felt like a blur. Leonard met with a caseworker who listened to his story without a trace of judgment. Together, they mapped out a plan to help him get back on his feet. They arranged for him to stay at the shelter temporarily, scheduled a doctor's appointment to address his health concerns, and connected him to a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Leonard felt like the broken pieces of his life were being carefully picked up and put back together. That evening, Leonard sat on the edge of a small cot in the shelter, replaying the past 24 hours in his mind. The kindness of a stranger. The unexpected offer of help. The simple act of being seen. It all felt surreal, as if he were living in someone else's story. He thought of Barron's words and the promise he had made to help himself. It wouldn't be easy, Leonard knew that much, but for the first time, he believed it might actually be possible. Meanwhile, outside the shelter walls, the ripple effect of Barron's actions had already begun. A video of their interaction, recorded by a bystander, had gone viral overnight. It spread like wildfire across social media, the headlines praising the young Trump heir's unexpected act of generosity. The footage showed Barron crouched beside Leonard, handing him the money, speaking words of encouragement that had resonated with millions. Some skeptics called it a publicity stunt. Others argued it was a rare moment of genuine compassion from someone with privilege. Regardless of the debates, one thing was undeniable: the video captured something raw and deeply moving. Inspired by what they'd seen, people from all walks of life began reaching out to Hope Outreach Resource Center, offering donations, volunteering, and support. Leonard had no idea his story had become the center of a national conversation. He was too focused on the steps ahead, attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, and, most importantly, learning to believe in himself again. As Leonard lay down that night, the weight of the past year felt just a little lighter. Somewhere out there, the young man who had stopped to help him was making waves. But Leonard's focus was simpler: to take it one day at a time and honor the promise he had made. By the end of the week, Leonard started noticing subtle changes, both in himself and in the world around him. At the shelter, the staff treated him with a warmth and kindness he hadn't experienced in years. They didn't just offer practical support, they encouraged him, reminding him that his story wasn't over yet. Word of Leonard's journey quietly spread through the shelter community. Others who had been struggling in silence began to approach him, inspired by his courage to take the first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man said, giving Leonard a pat on the back. The gesture was simple, yet it stirred an unfamiliar sense of pride in Leonard. Outside the shelter, however, Leonard's story was no longer quiet. The video of his encounter with Barron Trump had gone viral, racking up millions of views within days. News outlets picked up the story, analyzing every detail. Commentators debated whether Barron's actions were sincere or performative, while viewers across the country shared their own thoughts online. "Privilege with a purpose," one tweet read. "This is how you use it for good." Another user wrote, "It's sad that kindness like this is so rare it shocks us." Kudos to Barron for showing it's possible. Leonard only learned about the attention when a shelter staff member showed him the video. Watching himself on screen, Leonard felt a complicated mix of emotions: embarrassment, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name. He barely recognized the man in the video, the hollow eyes, the defeated posture. It was a stark reminder of how far he had fallen and a glimpse of how far he could rise. Meanwhile, Barron remained silent amid the growing buzz. He turned down interviews, avoided public statements, and ignored the online noise. To him, it had never been about gaining praise, it was about Leonard. Behind the scenes, Barron quietly ensured that the shelter received generous donations, enough to expand its programs and reach more people like Leonard. The video had sparked something larger, a movement. Across the country, people began sharing their own acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and #PayItForward. Local organizations saw an increase in donations, and volunteers began stepping forward in record numbers, all inspired by the simplicity of Barron's gesture. For Leonard, the ripple effect became deeply personal. One evening, as he sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached him hesitantly. "Leonard," the man said. Leonard squinted, trying to recognize the face. Then it hit him. "Paul?" Leonard's voice trembled. It was his younger brother, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two men stared at each other, the weight of lost years hanging heavy in the air. "I saw the video," Paul admitted, sitting down beside him. "I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Leonard shook his head, his throat tight with emotion. "It's not your fault. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to find me." Paul placed a reassuring hand on Leonard's shoulder. "Well, I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Their reunion was bittersweet, a painful reminder of what had been lost, but also a hopeful glimpse of what could still be rebuilt. For Leonard, it was another step forward, not just toward improving his circumstances, but toward healing his relationships and rediscovering his sense of self. As the weeks passed, Leonard began to see his story differently. It was no longer just a tragedy, but a testament to resilience. Though the road ahead was still long, he carried with him a renewed purpose, fueled by the kindness of a stranger. Because Barron hadn't just given him money, he had given him hope.